You know, reincarnation is actually quite a common theme in fiction. In fact, there's even a subgenre of anime that focuses around the idea of it, which I really like because my favorite character archetype is the one where they get to be reincarnated multiple times. They get to be stronger every single time and then eventually become all-powerful. However, today I want to talk about something a little bit different. What if you were reincarnated as a slime? As a slime, your life would be pretty hard, especially since you're basically just a puddle of protoplasm with no legs. You wouldn't be able to go anywhere or do anything on your own. You'd probably have to rely on other people to carry you around. But you can also see how this situation could lead to some fun roleplay scenarios. Like maybe you being carried by someone who doesn't like you very much and decides to throw you into a lake, or perhaps you end up on the side of a mountain after falling out of someone else's backpack. There are a lot of possibilities for a slime. The only problem is that actually playing the game with those scenarios in mind isn't really possible. The game that I'm talking about today is called That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime. And while it does start out with a decent premise, the gameplay loop ends up feeling tedious pretty quickly. The story in the game follows a fairly standard isekai plot. You play as a regular Japanese salaryman who dies and gets sent to another world. But instead of getting reincarnated as a human or halfling or any other kind of normal creature, you get to be a slime. Not a particularly special slime either. You don't even have any unique skills or abilities. You can't even eat things. All you can do is absorb materials through your body and level up. You will eventually gain the ability to eat things. But until then, everything that you absorb will have to be converted into skill points. It's a little odd, but not necessarily a bad thing. The game gives you a few tutorials early on that teach you what you can in QE and do, like how you can't attack enemies directly. So you'll have to avoid them, eat grass to restore HP, and how to use your basic skills. After a few minutes of this, you finally get to make your first decision in the game, which is what kind of slime you want to be. This part was honestly kind of fun, because there are a lot of options, and each one has its own unique art and description. For example, fire slime makes you resistant to fire and lets you breathe underwater, while muddy slime makes you resistant to earth and water and lets you move on land. Since there are 4 different types of slimes, I decided to try and get all of them. Once you make your choice, the game drops you off in the forest where you can now go and explore. The world is split into 2 halves, with the western half being a forest area and the eastern half being a desert area. Between these 2 areas are a mountain range that you can't get through yet. The general goal of the game is to travel east and help out a village that's under attack from monsters. To get there, though, you're gonna need to absorb a lot of materials. And that's where most of the gameplay in this game comes from, exploring over and over again to farm enough resources to level up and unlock new skills. As you absorb more and more materials, you'll slowly make your way across the map, dodging bears and boars and wolves and goblins, and basically any other type of monster that you might find in an average RPG game. Now, if you've ever played a game like Terraria, Minecraft, or Starbound, then you'll know what to expect here. The world is randomly generated and filled with different resources and monsters. You'll need to eat grass to restore HP and mana to use your skills, and the best strategy to take is to try and avoid fighting as many battles as possible. The game also throws in some puzzles here and there, which is nice, but they aren't very complex and you'll be able to figure them out pretty quickly. Now, normally, this type of gameplay loop wouldn't be too bad. Exploring a randomly generated world can actually be kind of fun, especially if there are new things to discover. Unfortunately, this is a visual novel, and that means that there isn't any music or sound effects. So you're stuck listening to crickets and birds for the entire game. And believe me when I say that it gets pretty annoying after a while. Also, I mentioned earlier that you could use skills in battle, but really the only one that you're going to be using is your slime skill, which basically just lets you avoid enemy attacks. Your other skills are pretty much useless unless you're trying to speedrun the game. You do get a few more skills later on, but they aren't exactly game-changing. Basically, This game is just one big exercise in patience. You'll need a lot of it if you want to get far in this game. So I ended up just absorbing materials and leveling up until I had unlocked enough skills to take on the Forest King. Now, this wasn't exactly a difficult battle. I mean, I didn't even have to attack him, but it was still pretty boring. Once he died, the game gave me an option to interact with his corpse. And that allowed me to absorb his stats and become a high-level slime. Absorbing monsters works like absorbing materials, except their stats are randomized. Some of them will give you more health, others will give you more attack power, and others will give you better resistance. So ULL need to absorb a lot of monsters in order to become strong enough to beat the Desert Bandit boss. Now, I had actually watched a gameplay video of this before I started playing the game myself. And in that video, the person was able to avoid the boss fight entirely by climbing up a cliff. In my playthrough, that unfortunately didn't work. So I had to absorb even more materials until I became a level 70 slime. Now, this is where I stopped playing. I just couldn't bring myself to absorb any more materials. I had been doing it for literally hours at this point, and I was just sick of it. I did try out a couple more character types, but none of them really changed the core gameplay loop. They did, however, change the dialogue options you got during the story scenes. So that was nice. All in all, that time I got reincarnated as a slime is an okay game.
If you enjoy games like Terraria or Minecraft, then this might be right up your alley. Especially if you like excruciatingly boring gameplay loops and a lack of music.
Personally, I prefer games with a little bit more action. But if you're willing to put up with the lackluster gameplay, then you'll probably have a lot more fun than I did. So I rate this game a 2 out of 10. It pains me to say that, but it's true. That being said, I'm still gonna keep searching for good Isekai games. So if you have any recommendations, feel free to leave them in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. Anyways, thanks for watching.